are we though? Go ahead and refresh this. Ah, there we are. Alrighty, we are live on YouTube. Hello, everybody. We have 5 people already in the stream. This is awesome. Welcome, everybody. Okay, just gotta mute myself over there so I'm not getting 1,000 different audio in. Wonderful. So for the few people that are watching, if you wouldn't mind maybe somebody just popping in the chat, confirming that you can hear us and see us okay. We did have a problem a little while ago where the guest was not audible, so that was a problem. We will wait about a minute for anyone else to join. Yeah. Well, we lost some of our viewers, but that's okay. They'll be back. Lindsay, can you just say something?
Sure. So yeah. Thanks. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lindsay, and I'm really excited to chat SEO here live on YouTube with you all.
Awesome. Perfect. It's working. Yeah, there's a little lag, but I can hear you. All right. Well, let's jump in. Fantastic. Alrighty. Well, welcome everyone to our 3rd WPAMA. This is a weekly series hosted by WP Buffs. My name is Allie Nimmons, and I'm your host. In case you don't know, we round up your questions on a specific topic every week and sit down with a really cool person to answer them live. If you're just tuning in and you do have questions, please leave them in the chat. And if we have time, we will get to those questions. We do also do a random giveaway at the end of every episode, so make sure that you stay tuned until the very end for that. Those people who are entered to win are taken from our email list. So if you are not signed up yet and would like to potentially win a prize in a future episode, go to wpbuffs.com/WP-AMA-series and sign up to win a future prize. This episode will be available to watch here on our YouTube channel in perpetuity. In case you miss anything, you need to leave and come back, and captions will be included here within the next 24 hours as well. So this week, answering questions about SEO, WordPress SEO to be specific, is Lindsay Halsey. Is it Halsey or Halsey?
It's Halsey.
Halsey, perfect. My first instinct was right. Lindsay is the co-founder of Pathfinder SEO and will actually be a speaker later this month at the WPAMA Virtual Summit. Hi, Lindsay. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, I live in Basalt, Colorado, which is near Aspen, where it's very cold today and snowing already in September. And I work in SEO. First, I worked in SEO by co-founding an agency called Webshine that continues to thrive and offers SEO services. And then more recently launched a software solution to SEO called Pathfinder SEO, and it offers a guided approach to SEO for site owners, freelancers, and agencies.
That sounds awesome. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. We have a couple of amazing SEO questions here. So let's go ahead and dive in with the first one. So the first question we got is it true that load time and SEO are related? And why?
Yes. Sure. So whenever we think about load time, we're talking about performance and speed, and speed matters. Google's been telling us that speed and performance matters for quite a while. And for those that have been invested in SEO, they told us the same story a while back around mobile usability and responsive design. And so there's a bit of a lag time between when Google tells us something is important, like load times and speed, and then when it becomes a really big component of the search engine algorithms. And so it's not surprising that Google and the other search engines care about speed and performance and load times, because ultimately it reflects back on them when the search engines send you to a slow website. So if you were to go and you do a search and you click on the first listing in the Google search results, the free listings, and you go to the web page, it doesn't matter how amazing that content is, how amazing that website is. If it's slow to load, you're probably going to bounce back to Google. And that's something Google can measure, that load time. And the reason is just because we've all become pretty accustomed to fast websites and good performance And so Google is going to want to incorporate that sort of real world usability factor in its algorithm. That makes natural sense. It's also pretty easy for Google to measure these things around load time and first contentful paint and all sorts of things about speed. And so it becomes something that they can really quantify and set a bar against to say, yes, we really want to make sure that the content we're showing, the pages we're sending people to out of the search engines meet this minimum requirement. And that minimum requirement changes, and there are multiple different kind of components of it. And one of the things you might be hearing about right now is Google started to talk about these core web vitals. And your core web vitals are components of speed and performance and load times. And Google is starting to show you those for your website as a whole via the Google Search Console. So you can go into the Google Search Console, verify your website if you don't already have access, and then you can see actually how do you measure up against Google's benchmarks around core web vitals. And those benchmarks right now are just kind of familiarity benchmarks, things that you should start to understand where you're doing well and where you're not. And come 2021, Google's already told us there's going to be an algorithm update that's going to further reward websites that have really good performance, that do well against these metrics. And so there's a ton of lag time, just like that mobile usability lag time, before this next algorithm update that really focuses on speed. And so we don't get to know all of the different factors in the search engine algorithms and how they are weighted. But what we're hearing from Google is, and what we've known for a long time, is that speed really matters because it matters for users. So it's it makes total sense.
I love that. So you did actually kind of touch a little bit on the algorithm. And I feel like that's kind of this big, scary word or phrase to a lot of people, is like, oh my gosh, this big mysterious algorithm. And it leads me into one of the other questions, which is, what do you do when when Google changes their algorithm, and how do you know when they do? So I think I know that Google will like release information or kind of announcements about the algorithm. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about, where do you find that information? How would you go about knowing that the algorithm is going to change, and how do you prepare for something like that?
Yeah, so when it comes to the algorithm, that is usually the piece of the puzzle that people feel is the most mysterious about SEO. And when you think about Google's algorithm, any of the search engines' algorithms, it really goes back to how the search engines work. And so in really simplistic terms, the search engines use bots or spiders to crawl the web and to create an index of pages. And then when someone does a query, every query you put in, every keyword search you do on Google or a voice search, it runs that phrase that you searched for through an algorithm to deliver ranked results. And so it's not surprising that algorithm is really complicated. If all it did was wait on one thing, like your content and how many keywords you used in your content, well, then the internet becomes not a really great place, because all we have to do well in SEO is to use the same keyword a million times, which we remember those days years ago. And so the algorithms are trying to model the real world. They're trying to give people the most relevant results on a topic. And so they have to weight different components. So one thing that gets weighted pretty heavily right now is length of content. So Google's saying, well, we really want to show expert-oriented content. And one way to judge expertise is just by like the depth you go into a topic. So if I'm going to write a post about, say, WordPress SEO, and I want it to perform well, that post can't just be a paragraph long. It needs to really tackle WordPress SEO in a big picture way. And because that's one of the components of the algorithm that we're going to want to achieve success in. Another component of the algorithm is that other people need to say that this is really great content. And they say that by linking to that content. And so that's this world of offsite SEO. So there's a part of the algorithm that I have total control over, the content I write. And then there's a part of the algorithm that I don't have as much control over, how many people link to or share or sort of vote up my content over here. So we're talking in really simplistic terms. The algorithm actually has numerous components, and they all have different weights. And so it's up to Google, and they can really come out and add new components to the algorithm. So they can tell us, or they may not. They can weight things differently. But at the end of the day, what you have to remember is that they're in your court. The algorithm is trying to reward the best content, the best web pages, the best websites. They're trying to reward relevancy and show the best results. And so if you engage in what we consider like a holistic or long-term approach to SEO, then you don't actually really worry about algorithm updates. Because these algorithm updates are in line with what you're already working on, what you're already focusing on. So I don't walk into my office and say, oh my gosh, there was an algorithm update. I'm going to have to go and work really hard on all my clients' websites to get caught up. Instead, I walk into my office and I can read the recent news and sometimes learn about one of those algorithm updates, and then start to think about how I might want to evolve or tweak our strategy potentially to kind of angle in on that. But I'm not all of a sudden throwing away all my old work and re-strategizing. So right now, we know that there's an algorithm update around speed. And so what we can do is talk to our clients, talk to people within our business, and help to put more weight on the idea of speed and performance. So we want to be talking with our web developer and thinking about speed. If you're a WP Buffs subscriber, you're talking to WP Buffs and saying, what are we going to do to optimize our site around speed? And so it's kind of that forward-looking piece here where we know about it, which is actually, when it comes to algorithm changes, that's not common. We usually don't have this much lag time, this much time to prepare. And other times we really have to just look at kind of clues that are out there about what Google's rewarding. A lot of the algorithm changes are small. And so Google doesn't actually report on them. Sometimes SEOs in the industry, they watch for these things. People are watching for them, and they'll report on them on, Search Engine Journal or the Moz blog. And they'll come out and say, wow, we saw a lot of volatility in rankings across these different sites. And then they'll give you insights as to, like, did this only impact certain industries? Does it seem to favor something? And they'll make, SEOs will sort of put their heads together to try to figure out what Google's up to. And then sometimes Google will come back and over another channel, come back and confirm or deny that there's been some kind of a shift in the winds. But I don't really worry too much about those small shifts in the winds. What you're really looking for is follow a holistic approach that really plays off of what Google cares about. And then the algorithm changes are almost always in your favor. And when I think about that, and when I think about working on client projects and always trying to make sure I'm moving in the right direction, one of the big things that I try to help our clients understand is that we're always trying to focus on kind of 3 areas of growth. We're trying to share more expertise online. That's content. So whether it's writing new content, expanding existing content, we're thinking about content, creating video content, creating podcast content is your expertise. Then we're always trying to grow authority. Authority comes when other people say our content is actually expert oriented. And we do that by getting backlinks from other websites. We do that via things like guest posting or being on somebody else's podcast and getting a link back to your website. We do that by joining our local chambers of commerce and getting our business listed in a geographic area. We do this by updating our Google Maps listing to make sure that the Maps data, that name, address, phone number, is really accurate and up to date. These all are components of how you can build some online authority. And that kind of moves us into the world of trust, which is also what Google's looking for, is they want to have a lot of trust around your brand, around your content. And you engender trust by simple things like having an accessible contact page on your website, right? We know that feels good when you go to a website and like, oh, I could get in touch with these guys. If you're on an e-commerce website, it's all trust comes from having that feeling of, yeah, I want to do business on this e-commerce website, or you're like, ooh, is this for real? And so you're trying to engender trust, and Google can actually measure these things. And so if you're always working towards expertise, authority, and trust in real world business, so you're not spamming, you're not getting people who aren't really customers to leave reviews on your Google Maps page, or you're not buying links. These are not ways to grow those. If you're doing these through organic, natural, real world business practices, then the algorithm changes, they're in your favor.
That's awesome. And that actually dovetails really well. I feel like so for everyone watching, Lindsay has not seen any of the questions that I'm asking her, but it seems like every answer kind of leads me into the next one, which is awesome. The next question is, what are some best practices for backlinking strategies and increasing domain authority? So we did kind of touch on that a little bit, right? Like building trust, doing things organically, making those connections. Can we dive a little bit deeper into that? Like when we get into that off-page SEO type of stuff and building those numbers, I guess. What are some of your favorite ways of doing that? Like if somebody is just starting out and they're not really sure where to begin, what are some of your favorite ways of starting with those?
That's a great question. So I love backlink building because it's challenging, but also because really it's quite simple. And where we see most people start with backlink building is they look and see where their competitors have backlinks, or they might try to go and buy backlinks or do something, maybe try to buy a domain that already has some good links pointing in. And that's all pretty old school SEO tactics. Google can see through that. And so where we work with customers, whether you're just getting started with backlink building or you've been at it for a long time, is we start in the real world. And what we think about is our goal is to model the real world in the online world. And so the real world is where you do business. It's your partnerships, it's your collaborations. And we want to really make sure that Google understands your business in this broader real world context online. And so where we start is a brainstorming exercise. I like to start by just simply writing down all of the people that we do business with. These are not our customers. This is, you sit down and you write down and think about adjacent industries. So if you're in the WordPress space, when we think about adjacent industry spaces, you'd be thinking about like my company, Pathfinder and WP Buffs. We're in adjacent industry spaces and we're partners in the real world. But does Google know that we're partners? Have we ever linked between our websites to show them this partnership? And so I'm going to list down for my business all of these types of partnerships. And they're going to be things in the WordPress ecosystem, like an opportunity, or we're really involved in WordCamps, and we like to go and speak at WordCamps. So that's kind of part of our partnership and part of our ecosystem. So trade shows, events, other businesses you do business with, local chambers of commerce. If any of your team members are on boards of directors, so maybe your team has some people that are really active in the nonprofit space. And so they're out there going and volunteering in their evenings. And maybe you guys donate some services to like your local Habitat for Humanity. The list goes on. So your whole team is sitting there and you're thinking of all of these things that we do in the real world. And then I simply ask myself, well, does Google know about these? And I can go through and check the box and be like, oh yeah, they know that WP Buffs and Pathfinder like working together because we've authored some guest blog posts that kind of link between our sites. So they know about that partnership, but maybe they don't know about this other partnership that we have. And so then we have to go and say, how are we going to show Google? And it could be as simple as adding a links on like a partner page from one website to another. It could be a little more involved, like trading guest blog posts. It could be being on a podcast. There's a lot of different ways. It could be sponsoring an event. So going from attending a WordCamp to being like a community level sponsor and getting listed on that WordCamps event page. Maybe people on your team volunteer. And so they're on the volunteer page of that WordCamps website, and that can point some links and can help you start to build domain authority. And so to me, the best way to build links is to take this really real world approach, because what you're building is what Google cares about. They're trying to see your business in the context of other businesses. And you can amp up from there and do other things like trying to do more PR work is a really good way. Trying to get quoted in the newspaper when somebody wants, when somebody wants to get information about something that you're an expert on. there's a lot of ways to kind of amplify beyond this initial framework of modeling the real world. But for most businesses, they've glanced over this, what they already have in their back pocket, which is their real world partnerships. And they've started to move into some of the harder things like PR, and skipped kind of this really foundational stuff, which helps Google a ton in terms of understanding your business's authority.
I love that. I feel like it's so kind of subversively helpful too, because like if you're just starting a business and you sit down and you think, okay, well, how can I build backlinks? And maybe you don't have any of those relationships yet. That's your next step probably, is to go out and start building those relationships. So you start with the real world scenario rather than starting with, you know, the technical side of things. Like I remember working in SEO years ago, and yeah, all the companies were focused on like, we have to like contact all these blogs and beg them to put our, you know, link to our product on their blog posts. And it makes so much more sense to do it the other way around, right? Like build the relationship first and then qualify that relationship or prove that relationship to Google via that link. That makes perfect sense to me. I love that. Maybe a little bit harder now that we're all stuck at home and we can't go to WordCamps and stuff, but I'm sure there are definitely still ways to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And for businesses just getting started, or just say like a local business, the good news is you don't need to build as much authority as somebody playing in a national space, right?
Right.
So if your audience is hyper local, let's just say you're a restaurant or an interior designer and you serve a local area, or your client does that, they don't need a link from the New York Times. Sure, that'd be great, but that's not realistic. And so when you're starting to think about smaller businesses, you're starting to think about, you don't need as much authority to excel in your keyword space. And so what I'm thinking about there for local businesses, you know, one is just, that chamber of commerce, right? Then professional organizations. So that interior designer is probably like accredited through some other entity. And so does that other entity, that accreditation entity, have a publication or anything online of like interior designers? Then maybe that interior designer got featured in a local magazine, right? That has a digital version. And so that local magazine featured a house, and we realized, wow, they didn't actually link from, you know, this back to this client's website. So there's an opportunity. So you just picked up 3 links from just everyday stuff. And those 3 links are going to carry an interior designer serving a local area really far. They wouldn't carry a big national brand really far. They're going to carry a local business really far. And then that interior designer works with contractors. That interior designer probably works with architects. So starting to model some of those relationships makes sense in those adjacent industry spaces. And then that interior designer has hours of operation, address, phone number, name, service area, and they could go beyond Google Maps. So they could do some citation building. So they show up on other websites like Bing Maps, Apple Maps, Foursquare, yellowpages.com. That's going to build their authority. And then all of a sudden they've got a pretty killer backlink network, and it's all really comfortable. And yes, it was architected, but it was architected just how Google would like it to be, which is to model the real world, and nothing was paid for just for a link.
Right. That makes total sense. Let's dive a little bit more into WordPress specific things. So the next question that came in, is an SEO friendly theme important for SEO? And what I tack onto the end of that is, what exactly is an SEO friendly theme? Like I feel like you see that when you're looking at themes and theme shops, like, oh, this is super SEO friendly, but what does that actually mean at the end of the day? And does it really matter? Is it really that important compared to, you know, the things that we're talking about right now, like backlinks and, you know, all of those other connections?
Sure. So your theme selection probably has the most impact on speed when it comes to WordPress and performance. And so a lot of times when you talk to people about SEO friendly themes, one of the things you want is for it to be like lightweight and just kind of fast out of the gate. So like, we are big fans of Astra, super flexible, lightweight theme. And so that is, in my mind's eye, an SEO friendly theme, just based on the fact that it loads quickly and is a really simple framework that allows us to scale and build a website. So when you're picking a theme, that's one of the pieces of the puzzle, but you could take a SEO friendly theme like Astra and then pile in like 50 plugins when you only needed 5. And now it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter what theme you picked because you just made a huge tangle of plugins, which created complexity and weight to your website. And so now all of a sudden that first decision doesn't matter at all because you've just loaded all these plugins. And now you just don't have as SEO friendly of an architecture for your website.
Right.
And so when I think about theme and plugin and development side of SEO, I really just think about being really purposeful and making really conscientious decisions. And so when you do, we can get websites built in. WordPress is inherently very SEO friendly in our mind's eye because it's a publishing platform. And that's what Google cares about. So all the framework beneath it is important, but it's all about the content you produce and your on-site optimization and the link building. And so really what WordPress allows you to do is to publish great content in a user-friendly, beautifully designed way. And so that theme selection should be purposeful, but don't get hung up on picking a theme. Don't get hung up on, don't use 50 plugins to do something you could have done with 10. Right. And don't even really get hung up on the selection of which SEO plugin is best. Because at the end of the day, these all combined together, what's going to really matter is how you configure that plugin, what your content looks like, and how you actually configure your website matters much more than just any one of those single decisions.
That makes total sense. So touching on plugins now, the question that came in is, what SEO plugin should I choose? I'm going to add a little bit onto that because I think that's it might be a bit of an oversimplification. Do you have recommendations for plugins that you feel are helpful when you are, like you said, building that architecture, building that strategy for improving the SEO of your, or building the SEO of your site or improving the SEO of an existing site?
Yeah, so there are a lot of great SEO plugins in the WordPress ecosystem. And the first thing you want to do is make sure you pick one that has multiple functions. And so when we were talking about like the 50 plugins versus 10, a multi-function SEO plugin is going to allow you to use one plugin to do multiple things. Like that one plugin is going to create your XML sitemap. It's going to let you manage your robots.txt file. It's going to let you customize your page titles and meta descriptions. It might help you verify your website with the Google Search Console. It might help you manage your 301 redirects. So you can see it's going to do a lot of things so that I don't have to pick 4 different plugins that are each going to be really hyper specific and do just one thing each. So I like a multi-function SEO plugin as the first start. And within that space, there's a lot of good players, and Yoast SEO, all-in-one SEO, Rank Math, SEO Presser. These are all what I consider this multi-function SEO plugin. And they all do, without looking at the granular details of every little component of them, they all do essentially the same stuff. They give you this infrastructure to be able to make sure that your WordPress website communicates really well with the search engines and that you can market it. And so from there, you can get into decisions around, people have different opinions on which ones are the most secure, which ones are lightweight, which ones have a free feature that another one has a paid feature. So you can get really into those details in selecting your multifunction SEO plugin. But again, this is where I would say spend a little time here making a choice between probably one of those 4 top plugins, but then invest your effort in the actual configuration of that plugin. And so when we bring in like a new SEO client, if they're using one of those plugins, I don't ask that they switch so that everybody's on Yoast or everybody's on all-in-one. I am totally comfortable doing SEO and can make a website perform really well in the search engines with any one of those plugins because it's a tool. And so it's which boxes you're checking, what you're filling out, what your actual page title and meta description is. That's what matters more than the actual plugin that you picked. And so, yeah, that's sort of a big picture. I tend to, if it's me just picking the plugin for a client's website right out of the gate, I go with Yoast SEO. And I start with the free version unless they have a lot of redirects to manage, and then I go premium. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Short and sweet. Yoast is my favorite also. Okay. So I've heard this question personally millions of times, and I've never really been able to answer it confidently. for your website's blog, how much content is enough? So I feel like that could mean either two things, right? Like how often do you post? Or like you kind of mentioned earlier, like how long should your content be? I always said, it depends. And then that opened up a longer conversation. How would you answer a question like that?
So it does depend. But let's talk about what it depends on and how you can help guide that decision for your clients. And let's frame that in the bigger picture that for the last few years, everybody knows that content has always been king, so to speak, in SEO. And so blogging has always been important. And so businesses have started and websites are blogging, right? People are creating content. And what did that do? Well, that added an enormous amount of work for the search engines to crawl and index all of the content, right? And so all of a sudden, Google's like, wait, we put a lot of emphasis on recency, so frequent posting, and not enough emphasis on quality and length and that expertise. And so now we're doing all of this work and having to wade through thousands of posts on a topic when really some of these should be like combined to make something really great. And so there's definitely an era right now of the quality is more important than the quantity or frequency of posting. And so, we're trying to make it so Google, is not so resource constrained when it comes to crawling a blog. And so that's one of the trends that we've seen. And so out of that trend comes, if I look at a specific client example, we had a client that I've worked with for 10 years, and they have a lot of expertise to share on how to protect your animals, your wildlife from predators, right? So from like a coyote or any kind of thing in your backyard, or how to protect your garden. And so they have that's their area. So there's a ton of ways that we can write about content because there's a lot of predators and there's a lot of things to protect when it comes to backyards all over the world. And so we can create content. And so that's what we did. We created a weekly blog post. They were all about 400 words long, and we crushed it for a number of years with just this really simple content framework that was short posts with frequency. And we posted more often than the competitive set. So everybody else was posting once a month. We were posting once a week. And our content was equal to those other pieces. So it wasn't longer or shorter. And that worked wonders for a long time. And then all of a sudden, the site's really big now because we did that for 8 years. And there's only so many ways you can slice. So you're starting to have posts that compete with your own posts on your own website. And the length of these posts really isn't that expert oriented. So when Google started to reward this quality, we actually stopped creating new content. And yet we do just as much work. And we started creating all updated versions of existing posts. And that strategy right now is really resonating in that situation. So for some businesses where they have a lot of content, but they haven't updated content in years, the best blogging strategy might be to go back into old posts and to revive them and to bring them back up to kind of current best practices, which is typically meaning making them longer. For a client just getting started with blogging, they should focus more on quality and less on quantity. So if they have the bandwidth to create 2,000 words of content in a month, I'd rather see that 2,000 words either in one post or maybe two than in a post every other day that are really short. And that kind of begs the question, does everybody even need to be blogging? Like, does my dentist office need to have a blog where they talk about like dental techniques and all this stuff? And the answer for a lot of businesses is no, not everybody has to blog. So you need to blog if expertise is a big part of what you're trying to share. But if you have a dentist office and their expertise is being really good at being a dentist in this geographic area, creating content on a blog may not be as valuable as just having really good content on the homepage and really good backlinks and really good offsite SEO and Google Maps listings. So it certainly depends, and it depends anywhere from you don't even need to be blogging to be doing well in some industry spaces to you need to get started with that quality over quantity approach. to, wow, you've been successful with this in the past, but you're a little bit less successful today with your approach. And so now you need to revise that and really go back into old posts and back into that revisioning process.
So a question that I have as an offshoot of that, when you go back and you revise those posts, like I've heard of people doing that and updating the date on that post to reflect the new content that's just been added. So if it's a post from, 2018, you revise it last week, you would change it to, 2020 date. Is that seen by Google as just you're being honest, you're being transparent that this post is updated? Is it seen as like sneaky, like, hey, this isn't when this was actually published? Where does that fall in Google's eyes?
Yeah, so that's kind of a gray area to an extent, and something that I've definitely done some experimentation with. I think a lot of people have. And so the most transparent way to edit existing content is to have your original published date and your last updated date all very transparently shown on the site. So you're like, I wrote this in 2018, I updated it in 2020. But Google's recency algorithm seems to hook on to that published date more than the last updated date. So when I take that approach, which seems the most transparent and the most honest, I actually don't see as good of results in SEO as when I just update the published date to today. And so I do tend to update the published date, and I don't use that last updated mechanism as often, but you have to really update the content. So just updating the date, that's like spammy SEO. That's not who you're trying to be and what you're trying to accomplish. And so when I think about what does it mean to update content and where do I begin, I always begin in the Google Search Console. So I go in, and in the performance section of Google Search Console, I can actually look up and see, where does this post get its keyword traffic from today? And I can see how many impressions, like how many searches, how many clicks, what my average ranking is. And so I start with updating content by reimagining my keyword research for that specific post. And I make sure that I walk away with really good clarity around what the post is doing well for and where the opportunities lie from a keyword standpoint. Then I turn to a tool like Answer the Public, and I put in my topic into Answer the Public. And I see what kind of questions people are asking about, what kind of comparisons. And I take that seed topic, usually it's like a 2 or 3 word kind of seed, and I start to blow it up and say, okay, when I first wrote this post, I wrote the how, right? So I wrote how to, let's just say, create an XML sitemap in WordPress, right? Pretty specific piece. But that's not crazy comprehensive. So if I were to want to expand this content, I'm going to go beyond the how. I'm going to start thinking about the what and the why, the where, and I'm going to make sure the how is still current. And so I'm going to expand my post by adding sections that are kind of based on an outline. And I'm going to do that by looking at some of the things that people are really looking for in the search engines. And if I put in XML sitemap into Answer the Public or a keyword research tool, what I'm going to get out of it is like, what is an XML sitemap? Or why are XML sitemaps important? Or XML sitemap versus robots.txt. And so now I'm starting to get ideas around the keywords that I'm going to use, and then the structure of how I'm going to grow this post. And so now I'm going to go and do the rewrite and edit and publish and maybe add new imagery, maybe create a video. And now I'm going to publish. And now I feel like, wow, that post is a legitimately totally fresh, right? Yeah. Like I took a topic that I wrote 400 words on and was doing mediocre and was a little outdated, and I turned it into a 2,000 word article. I added media to it. I added all these resources. It's really current. It should say today's date as a published date. And so that really resonates well with the search engines because that's what they're looking for, that super quality, in-depth content.
Love that. The next question that we have, which is a little bit vague, so I'll let you run with it however you feel. Sure. What is the relationship between SEO and social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's overlap between SEO and social media. And when you see brands that are doing well in social media, they're usually doing well in SEO and vice versa. And so it makes us kind of think of there's a correlation there. And it makes sense that the search engines would want to model the social world in their algorithms, right? So they're trying to judge the quality of a piece of content, and it would make sense to see how viral that content went on a social channel and to weight that into the algorithm. And so the overlap between social and SEO has been something that's been talked about since social came out, right? And social started to get big, is like that'd be a really great way for the search engines to model this real world and to value content. But here's the thing, the social world is like really a tangled network. And so it's pretty hard for the search engines to model that compared to like that really simple link that goes from my website to your website, right? So it's way more complicated. Some of it's behind a closed door, right? Like behind logins and things like that, privacy. And then on top of it, it can be paid. So I can pay for a lot of visibility in social to get my content to float up by just adding some ad spend budget. So it can be bought. And so for all these reasons, I think that it's been hard for the search engines to actually really get a great connection that points from social over to SEO in the algorithm that really like looks and sees that play. And so what instead we tend to see is that social is an indirect component of SEO. It's not so overlapping that like if a post goes viral, it's going to also do awesome in the Google algorithm. It's usually via another circular byproduct. So if I write a blog post and I share it on Twitter and you see it, and then like a month from now, you're writing some other blog post and you are like, oh, I'm talking about WordPress SEO. And I remember on Twitter, Lindsay talked about this XML sitemap thing. She wrote a ton on XML sitemaps. I'm going to just write a little bit because I've got a general post about WordPress SEO. But I remember that my friend over here wrote this other post, and you learned about that from social media. You didn't do anything with it at the time. You had just been on Twitter and you scanned through and you saw it. And so now you throw a link in your blog post pointing back to my blog post because you saw it on social media. So it's that type of connection that's influencing my SEO, that link I got from you that you gave to me because you saw the content on social. That's where I see the connection as playing much stronger and why social is important for SEO.
I love that. And what struck me in that question too is like, I feel like a lot of SEO is about like you said, like building out really high quality content and in-depth content. And so much of social media is very short and quick and not very nuanced at the end of the day. And so it's always been hard for me to kind of marry the two as concepts because I feel like they are, when you sit down to read a blog post, right, you're trying to learn something, you're trying to solve a problem, whereas social media is so much more passive. So I find that question super fascinating in that like over time too, like how are the two going to affect each other or grow toward each other, things like that.
Definitely.
All right, we are at our last question and I like this one a lot. What is the biggest SEO misconception that you wish like everybody would not ask or everybody would learn, everybody would understand?
Yeah, I guess I think one of the biggest misconceptions around SEO, it's getting improved, or there's two maybe. So one big misconception is that like Google isn't in your court, and we kind of talked about that earlier. That it's sort of your website versus Google, and I think when you flip that around and you look at it as a collaboration of like how.
Ooh, we lost you there for a sec, Lindsay. The joys of live streaming. All right, Lindsay is coming up on my end as frozen and I cannot hear her, but we might just need to wait a second for Zoom to kind of reconnect. So while I'm waiting for Lindsay to hopefully be able to hop back in, I'll go ahead and announce our random giveaway winner in the meantime. We'll do something fun until we can get Lindsay back. And thanks to our trusty random number generator, our winner this week is Johnny, Johnnni. So congratulations, Johnny. I will be contacting you via email, the email that you used to sign up, and you can grab any free item that you want in the WP Buffs store. Cool. So Amy says frozen on the viewer end as well. Oh, good video so far up until now. So Lindsay has left the call, but hopefully she'll be rejoining back any minute now. While we're waiting, oh, here she is. She's back.
Yay! You kicked me out and I didn't even do anything and I just popped back in.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I think at this point Zoom is struggling with all of the. This happens to me at least once a week. Somebody gets kicked off a Zoom call. So sorry, everyone out there watching, but she's back to answer the last question.
So misconceptions around SEO, one is that like Google's sort of not in your court, right? So if you start to look at it as a little bit more like you're all working towards the same thing, this like really great relevant web content and online experience, I think everybody takes a little bit of a deep breath of fresh air. And then the other kind of big misconception that I think is shifting is that SEO is done in like a back office. So SEO is collaborative. Your whole team needs to understand what's happening with SEO. So whether you're doing it for a business or you're doing it for your own business, people need to understand, why does it matter when other people link to our website? Why does it matter when we get a good Google Maps review? Why does it matter that we're worried about content? And how can I help? And so if you're a local business and you serve customers that come into your business, or that's what your clients do, then everybody on the team needs to understand how to turn good customer service into great reviews on Google Maps, because SEO is super collaborative these days.
Those are two really, really good points. Thank you. Awesome. So we have reached the end of our questions list. So we'll wrap up here. Lindsay, thank you so much for being on with me. Do not miss Lindsay in our WPAMA Virtual Summit, which is coming up September 23rd, 24th. Lindsay, where can people find you or get in touch with you if they have more questions about SEO?
Sure, pathfinderseo.com, and I'm Lindsay at Pathfinder SEO, so you're welcome to drop me an email. I'm also on Twitter, and yeah, I'll keep an ear out.
All right. We'll log off here, but thank you everyone who has watched. Thank you everyone in the chat. Thank you, Lindsay. And make sure you go to wp-ama-series to sign up. And on Friday, if you are signed up, you get an early announcement of who the next speaker is, and you can submit your questions early to make sure that they do get answered. And we'll be announcing that speaker on our social media platforms on Monday. So thank you again, Lindsay. We'll see you at the summit on the 23rd.